On August 9, 1965, Lee Kuan Yew broke down sobbing on live TV as Malaysia voted 126-0 to throw his island out of the country. With zero oil, zero farmland, and zero drinking water, 2 million people were stranded on 224 square miles of swamp. In 7 years, Texas Instruments would build a mega factory on this dirt. In 20 years, political dissidents would be locked in windowless concrete cells without a trial. And in 40 years, every drop of human waste on this island would be recycled into drinking water. How do you turn a swamp into the richest port on Earth when your only natural resource is absolute control over your citizens? You are sitting at home right now, holding a smartphone made with chips that pass through the Strait of Malacca. 1/3 of global trade passes through this one, 7 nautical mile choke point. In 1965, that strategic channel was surrounded by hostile neighbors. Indonesia was launching armed guerrilla raids, while Malaysia controlled Singapore's entire fresh water supply. The annual GDP per capita was just $516. Slums lined the Singapore River, where human sewage flowed directly into the water supply. Worse, the British military announced it would withdraw all troops by 1971. That single move would erase 20% of the island's total economy overnight. Most post-colonial leaders responded to Western departure by nationalizing industries and expelling foreign corporations. Lee Kuan Yew did the exact opposite. Together with his economic minister, Goh Keng Swee, Lee drafted a radical piece of legislation, the 1967 Economic Expansion Incentives Act. Corporate tax rates for foreign pioneers were slashed from 40% to 4%. Profits could be sent overseas instantly with zero capital controls. What did multinational executives find when they stepped off the plane in 1968? They found a zero-corruption tax haven, but they also found something far more valuable, a completely pacified workforce. In 1961, Singapore suffered 116 industrial strikes. By 1978, the government had forced all labor unions under a single state-run umbrella, the National Trades Union Congress. The strike count fell to absolute zero. If a union leader called an unauthorized work stoppage, they were arrested without trial. To guarantee obedience, the government forced every worker to deposit up to 25% of their monthly paycheck into a state-run fund called the Central Provident Fund. This capital was used to build massive high-rise apartment complexes through the Housing and Development Board. Within 2 decades, 80% of the population was living in stay-toned flats. If you want the rest of how financial traps are designed to control population behavior, World Decoded breaks down these hidden economic architectures every week. Think about the psychological brilliance of this maneuver. You own your home, but only on a 99-year state lease. If you riot, strike, or vote for radical opposition, your property value and public housing eligibility are at risk. By 1972, American giants Texas Instruments, Hewlett-Packard, and National Semiconductor were pouring hundreds of millions into Singapore's factories. While Western corporations saw a capitalist paradise, what was happening to anyone who tried to speak out against the plan? To build this pristine metropolis, the government bulldozed centuries-old kampong villages, silenced unionists, and completely rewritten history. By 1990, the swamp was gone, replaced by glass skyscrapers and the busiest container terminal on the planet. But the machine was about to face a deadly flaw. While GDP surged 8% every single year, Lee Kuan Yew's secret police were quietly compiling a list of 100 specific names. Consider the story of Lim Chin Siong. In the late 1950s, he was Lee Kuan Yew's top political ally and a charismatic leader of the trade unions. When Lim broke away to form the opposition party Barisan Sosialis, he drew thousands to his rallies. He posed a direct threat to Lee's vision. On February 2, 1963, under Operation Cold Store, security forces launched pre-dawn raids. 113 anti-government politicians and unionists were arrested. They were held under the Internal Security Act, a colonial-era law allowing indefinite detention without trial.
Lim Chin Siong was held in solitary confinement for 6 years. He was only released after attempting suicide and signing a promise to leave politics forever.
Look at what happened to opposition politician J.B. Jeyaretnam in 1981, when he became the first opposition member elected to parliament in 15 years. The regime didn't execute him. They used a far more elegant weapon: bankruptcy lawsuits filed by ruling party officials in state courts. Jeyaretnam was hit with nearly $500,000 in defamation judgments. Stripped of his parliamentary seat and declared bankrupt, he was legally barred from running for office. By controlling the press through the Newspaper and Printing Presses Act of 1974, the state ensured every newspaper editor was appointed with government approval. Foreign publications were no safer. When the Far Eastern Economic Review and Asian Wall Street Journal published critical reports, their local circulation was restricted by up to 95%. The economy was a perfectly tuned clockwork engine. But what happens when the entire machine depends on a single valve controlled by a hostile foreign power? Singapore produces zero natural drinking water. Since 1961, up to 50% of its daily water supply was piped directly across the causeway from Johor, Malaysia. During diplomatic disputes in 1988 and 1998, Malaysian politicians repeatedly threatened to cut off the water pipeline if Singapore didn't compromise on trade and border disputes. Lee Kuan Yew made a secret memo to his cabinet. If Malaysia cut the water, Singapore's military was instructed to invade Johor and seize the water pumps within 24 hours. Military invasion would mean international sanctions and the end of the economic miracle. So Singapore devised a technological solution that defied nature itself. In 1998, Singapore launched a multi-billion-dollar project under the Public Utilities Board, NE Water. They built ultra-advanced treatment facilities using microfiltration, reverse osmosis, and ultraviolet disinfection to convert municipal sewage back into ultra-pure drinking water. By 2024, NE water and seawater desalination were capable of meeting up to 85% of Singapore's total national water demand. Think about what this means. A nation with zero natural resources didn't just import water, it engineered a closed-loop system where its citizens consume, purify, and reuse the exact same water infinitely. If you want to understand how global powers engineer hidden choke points and resource systems, hit subscribe. World Decoded breaks down one of these hidden forces every single week. This obsession with manufacturing space didn't stop at water. Since 1960, Singapore has reclaimed land directly from the sea, expanding its total landmass by 25%. They imported billions of tons of sand from Malaysia, Indonesia, and Cambodia, literally buying soil from neighbors who hated them to expand their own borders. Today, the Port of Singapore processes over 37 million container units per year. A ship berths every 2 minutes, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. This brings us to the ultimate paradox of Singapore's rise. The per capita GDP is now over $84,000 higher than the United States, Britain, or Germany. There is virtually zero violent crime, zero slums, and zero visible corruption. The streets are spotless, and the subways arrive within 90 seconds of schedule. This film was marked as the central revelation of the nation's system. Over 90,000 police surveillance cameras cover every corner of the island. Facial recognition algorithms monitor public housing elevators and subway turnstiles. Under the ethnic integration policy, the state strictly mandates ethnic quotas for every apartment building block. Malay, Chinese, and Indian families are legally balance allocated. You cannot pick your neighbor if your ethnic quota is filled. You cannot buy a car without paying an $80,000 permit called a Certificate of Entitlement. The man who wept on live television in 1965 built a global empire by turning his entire nation into a gilded, inescapable cage. Next week, we trace how another global superpower copied this exact playbook 20 years later and built a financial system that no regulator can see. Subscribe to World Decoded to get that story the second it drops.